I put the locket in his palm and told him the son I raised in this mansion wasn't mine. He didn't let go. His fingers, grown, scarred from a life I'd tried to soften, closed over the locket like it had a pulse of its own. The fire in the hearth did that soft cracking thing. The night sounds wrapped around the old English bones of this house. And I swear to you, honey, even the walls leaned closer to listen. The clock in the hall ticked louder. The smell of cedar and lemon oil and a breath of rain coming through the leaded windows. Lord, I remember the exact weight of that moment like a brick on my chest. I'd held this truth for so long that saying it out loud made the whole world tilt just a little, like the picture frames trembling when the train rumbles past at midnight. I can hear you breathing, sweetheart. Let me sit with you a minute in the dark. If you're here with me, pull that blanket up to your chin and listen close. This is a confession, and it's the kind that sticks to your ribs. And before we go any farther, my dear, if this story settles into your heart even a little, do subscribe and stay with me through the end. It helps an old woman keep telling the truth. The house you're imagining is almost right. Ivy-stitched walls and windows that squint at dawn. Oak shingles heavy with memories. Thornfield. Withering heights. No, honey. This is America, but a stubborn corner of it. A kind of wild-stitched English daydream that my husband's people built to remind themselves who they thought they were. Whitaker House, though the locals always called it the Hawthorn, because of the hedges that try to bite your skirt when you pass. In summer, they trim neat as a chapel, and in winter, they look like they'll lean in and tell you every secret they've heard through the glass. I was 18 when I first came up the gravel drive, just a ribbon of a thing, head full of hymns and hope. Thomas Whitaker met me halfway in a navy suit, smiling like something had just gone his way. Could be the way I blushed, could be the way the sun lit the dust like confetti. I loved him the way a young woman loves a promise, careless and complete. He'd laugh and pull me by the hand through the orchard, peach blossoms raining down into my hair, and swear up and down we'd fill this place with the slam of screen doors and sticky little fingerprints, that we'd have a boy who'd climb the banister and a girl who'd scold him, that we'd be root and fruit and all. Goodness gracious, I swallowed that dream whole. We married in the south parlour under the chipped portrait of some Whitaker ancestor who looked like he'd bite down on a coin before he'd smile. Thomas's mother, Margaret, watched me with eyes like polished steel. "We are a family of continuity," she said when she pressed her cold cheek to mine. "You must understand what that means." I didn't, not then. I thought it meant Sunday roast and fresh linens, and not forgetting to write thank you cards. I didn't yet know it meant so much more. Deeds and bloodlines, and men who kept records in leather books, and women who measured their days by whether they were worthy enough to keep that ledger unbroken. The Hawthorn was the kind of house that pours itself into you, like strong tea, slow and hot. It had rooms that remembered differently. The morning room smiled. The north wing sulked. The pantry whispered. The attic sighed. The silver reflected back a woman who tried to wear her hair like the ladies in the photographs and failed every time. Once I saw a girl in a blue dress skip past the end of the hall in the old wing, her legs a bright flicker, and when I ran to look, all I found was my own breath and the dust, lit up like a halo by the window. Saints preserve us. I learned the house talked, and I learned to answer back, to hush her when she got loud, and listen when she went quiet. We tried for that boy and that girl. And what came was a string of months with me listening for a heartbeat that would come and go like a moth against a light. Some things hurt more than language can hold. Honey, I remember laying my cheek on the cool tile of the bathroom floor, praying shallow, and then praying deep, until I could hear the linoleum. Breathe! I remember Thomas's hand on my shoulder, how it could be tender or impatient, and I learned to tell the difference just by the first tap of his fingers. The doctor called it bad luck then, and I called it punishment for something I couldn't quite remember doing. Margaret told me to eat the right things and think light thoughts. And the midwife, Mrs. Bellamy, brought me warm cloths and stories that didn't end until I stopped crying. You might have left me by now if this was gonna be one more sad story about a woman who wanted what the world wouldn't give her. I promise you it isn't just that. Listen, there are nights in a woman's life when the world decides what kind of person you're going to be, and there are other nights when you decide right back. The night the baby came, I decided. It was one of those storms that come up like an argument, sudden, loud, and intent on being right. The sky went green at the edges, like a bruise. The house made that long complaining sound, and the lanterns shivered, even before the wind found the shutters. Mrs. Bellamy came in soaked to her elbows and clucked at Thomas like a hen with a fox at the door. Out, she said, flapping a towel. Out, you hear me. A man's presence brings the devil's doubt. I gripped the carved edge of my bed and thought my bones might crack like ice in an old glass. I remember all of it and none of it, the pain like the sea, relentless and complicated, and then the hush. The hush is the worst. The hush is the house, holding its breath. Mrs. Bellamy's hands were swift, and her eyes were older than her body. And when she looked at me, I couldn't tell if she was blessing me or putting a mark on my head. I'm sorry, Ruth, she said, eventually, like a door closing softly. Thomas stood in the doorway, a dark stain spreading over my vision, and Margaret was already behind him, pinched and white. Continuity, she said, and the word had a shape like a knife. There's the story I told then, and the story I'm telling now. Then, the baby didn't cry. I held a small, heavy silence, and kissed it on its waxy forehead, and told myself to be brave. Thomas went out for a long walk, in the rain. Margaret sent for the undertaker at dawn. Now, the house made a sound I'd never heard before, a kind of shudder, and somewhere in the north wing, a door closed softly after 40 years of being stuck. Mrs. Bellamy wrapped something in linen and pressed it to my chest and took it away. Again so fast, my skin still thinks it's there. She told me to sleep. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling until the plaster patterns became faces. When I dozed, I dreamed of a cradle rocking in a room where the windows were boarded from the inside, and I woke with my hands making the shape of a song I didn't know. This is where something tore. In me, in the house, in the fabric of what we agreed was true. I love you too much to sweeten it. In the morning, a basket sat on our back steps, tucked into the gap where the hydrangeas crowd the kitchen door, and inside the basket was a baby boy, mouth puckered like a blossom, a scrap of blue blanket, and a tin soldier worn down to the nub. There was a note. It said, "For Ruth, forgive me." I didn't know any E's. Not then, that's what I told myself. I did what women do when the world hands them a miracle with the wrong address. I took him in. I opened the back door and the smell of wet earth walked into my kitchen like an old friend. I lifted that boy and tucked him against my neck, and my body answered him like we'd practiced it forever. He's ours, I whispered. To the blue-grey morning and the god of second chances. He was warm. He made this hiccup sound that was more like a prayer. I named him Caleb in my heart right then, and waited to see if the house agreed. The clock ticked steady. The fire settled. Somewhere in the north wing, I thought I heard the faintest rocking, like an empty cradle turned by breath. Honey, the choice I made was not the only one on the table. I could have woke Thomas. I could have taken the basket to the sheriff, to the pastor, to Margaret, but I'll tell you the truth you came here for. I was not brave enough to give him back to the wide world, and I was not brave enough to tell my husband what the storm had brought us. I was brave in another way. I stitched reality into the shape I could bear when Thomas came in with rain in his hair and grief in his eyes. I had Caleb at my breast, and I said, he cried, in a voice so steady, it sounded like it had always been the plan. Thomas stood as if someone had struck him from behind. He looked at the baby. He looked at me. He looked at Margaret, even though she wasn't there yet, like asking her permission with his eyes. Then he put a hand on my head and said, continuity. Do you see it, sweetheart? Do you see the loop we all got caught in? The next weeks were jars of pear preserves, and the soft heel of bread dipped in milk, and the way a baby's hair smells. Like the first page of a new book, people came and went. They brought quilts and casseroles and ideas about the shape of what had happened that slid right into the groove Thomas and I had carved for them. Lucky boy, they said, born to such a house. Margaret smiled with only half her face and announced to anyone who could hear that sometimes a child chooses when to arrive, and ours had simply chosen his own dramatic entrance. Mrs. Bellamy came with her string bag of herbs and a look that said she knew more than she'd say. Once when we were alone, she knelt and kissed Caleb's tiny knuckles and said, may your life be kinder than the one that made you. I didn't ask what she meant. I was too afraid to know. My dear, before I go on, tell me, have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart? I'd love to hear your story too. We carry these things better when we set them down together. Caleb grew like good news. He was the kind of baby who made old men kneel to tie their shoes twice, so he'd grin at them again. He touched everything carefully, and then hard. He crawled with determination and got to his feet and swayed like a little drunk sailor until he figured out how to take what he wanted upright. He loved the north wing. It's funny, isn't it? Babies know. He'd totter down the hallway, hand outstretched like he'd been called, and he'd stand outside the locked nursery door with his ear against the wood, humming back to something only he could hear. When I picked him up, he'd pat that door with his palm, gentle, like saying, soon. Thomas adored him, in the way a dour man can adore a thing that answers a silent prayer. He'd lift Caleb high and call him champ under his breath. Where no one could laugh at him for being sentimental, he took him out to the orchard and let him gum the skin of an apple. He brought in a carpenter to repair a loose stair. He tied his ties in front of the baby and told him the names of knots like he was speaking a blessing. But sometimes I'd catch Thomas studying the boy with a look too hungry to be fatherly. The look you give a lock when you think you might have found the key. I had a sister once, you know. Did I tell you? I guess I didn't. Her name was Evelyn. Evie to almost everyone but me. She had a laugh that made even Margaret blink and forgive things. She left town when I was 17, in a hurry that looked like freedom. Postcards came until they didn't. The last one looked like the ocean had eaten it and spit it back. Away, picture of a pier, and on the back, just one sentence. If it turns, let it turn. The handwriting was hers, but also not. Sometimes, when I felt brave, I read that line like permission. Other times, I read it like a threat. I thought, that morning with the basket. But I didn't let that thought root. You ever do that? Honey, hold the door against a thought with your whole body, because you know if it gets in, it will rearrange the furniture and take down the drapes. 3 weeks after Caleb arrived, I found a smear of red on the kitchen door jamb. A fingertips worth, like someone had steadied themselves coming in. I rinsed it with cool water and a rag, and told myself I'd cut my own hand without noticing. I started sleeping with my back against the nursery door. I started waking up to small new messes in the morning. Boot prints by the pantry, a scrape on the cellar door, a folded scrap of paper under the leg of the hall table, as if the house itself was trying to hide it. The paper was a torn bit of ledger with 2 words. I'm sorry. Mrs. Bellamy held it in her fingers like it was something alive. Did you leave this? Thomas asked me, amused and annoyed in equal measure, as if I'd been playing at mystery, like a child. No, I said, and he turned away before he could catch the way the word came out like a prayer and a swear at once. There was a door in the north wing that no one had touched in decades. We kept it locked because, well, that's just how it had always been. Families accumulate rituals. Margaret said it led to nothing. A storage room full of moth-eaten capes and broken fire screens. Maybe a trunk of baby clothes from a century. Ergo, the key to that door hung behind the parlor portrait of the Whittaker with the coin mouth, tucked into a small velvet pouch. I knew because I dusted that portrait until I could draw my name in the varnish, and once, just out of spite, I had slipped the string over my head and felt the weight of that key hit my sternum like a dare. On a Wednesday, funny how you remember the weekday like it matters, Caleb fell asleep with his fist around my locket, the one Thomas gave me on our wedding day. A teardrop of pink stone warm from the nest of my skin. I let him keep it as long as he wanted. When I tried to pry his fingers open, he grumbled and pressed it deeper into his palm. Lord have mercy, I whispered, and left it. I went to the kitchen and stilled all the little noises, simmering, pot, whistling kettle, ticking timer, until the house's own hum rose up around me. That's when I heard it, a lullaby in the walls, not a song a person sings, not one I recognized. It was a low, steady hush with a rhythm, like walking, like rocking. It came from the north wing. I stood there with tea cooling in my hand until it leaked down my wrist and into the cuff of my blouse. When I followed the sound, the floorboards told my weight to be careful. My breath did that shallow thing, the way you breathe when you're trying not to scare a deer. The house smelled like beeswax and old pine. As I passed, our wedding photo watched me like a fussy ant. At the end of the hall, the locked door waited. I shouldn't have known where to find the key, but I did. Isn't that the truth of it? We always know the things we pretend we don't. I slipped the key from behind the portrait, the velvet pouch cool as a handkerchief in summer, and I let the metal find the lock. It turned like it remembered the angle of itself. The door sighed like a person who had finally been asked to dance. Inside, the air was layered. Lavender, starch, dust, something like milk gone sweet, and underneath, a draft that smelled like the crawl space under a porch. There was a cradle. My heart landed against my ribs so hard, I thought it might splinter. The cradle rocked gently, like a boat with no wind. You ain't gonna believe me, darlin', and I would forgive you for it. I barely believe myself when I say this out loud. But the cradle rocked, and there was no one in the room. The lullaby in the walls climbed a half step, hummed at a seam, in the plaster, and fell away again. I took another step, and the world put a hand on my shoulder, the way a mother does when you're about to stumble. I looked down. Someone had cut a hole in the wall, at the exact height a person could slide a hand through, from the other side. The edge was smooth from long use. On the cradle's rail, a strip of ribbon was tied, frayed and pale, blue once. I untied it with careful fingers and found it was holding a note to the wood. The paper crackled. It took every bit of courage I had not to drop it as though it burned. You can turn back here, if you want. We're about to tip into the part that won't let you go. If you're still with me, thank you, sweetheart. Pull your chair closer. The note was a birth record, or the ghost of one. The name line was a smear, but there were 2 dates. One, from the night of the storm, with a thin black X scored through it, and one from the morning after, written in a different hand. In the margin, where no proper person would write, someone had pressed in the point of a pen until it tore the paper and scribbled a short sentence. The sentence was small and terrible. It said, "Her son lives. He is not here." I touched the words and the paper bent like old skin. My mouth went dry. My first thought, that dumb, fierce, animal thought, was, someone is playing a game with me. My second thought, old as my own bones, was, I knew it. I knew it because the hush I'd held that night had had weight, had had a temperature that evaded words, and because my milk had come in like a storm and stayed, even when Mrs. Bellamy covered my hands with hers and told me it would pass, and because the house had told me, in the only language it had, something was rocking. I should have told Thomas, but I didn't. Instead, I shut the door to the north wing, but I didn't lock it. I tucked the key into my apron pocket like it was an egg that might hatch if I kept it warm. I went to the nursery, and I sat on the rug, and I watched our Caleb sleep, his lashes making crescent moons on his cheeks. He was mine in every way that matters, but blood has a weight. You only understand it when you feel it swing in your palm, like a pendulum, and point at something you can't pretend you don't see. That night, Thomas stood in the doorway of the nursery, with the kind of sorrow that makes it hard to talk. He touched Caleb's hair with his thumb, and then jerked his hand away, like he'd remembered something too late. "We are blessed," he said to the dark. "We are blessed," I answered. He looked at me then, like I was a map, and he was lost. And for a moment, I saw him at 10 years old, bracing himself against Margaret's case knife of a voice, telling himself not to cry. "We'll keep it this way," he said. But it came out, like a question. I nodded. "Yes," I said, and swallowed another piece of myself. "Do you remember I told you I didn't know any E's? That wasn't strictly true. There was one. There was the E who threaded my life before all this, the one I almost let myself remember. Evelyn, my sister, out there bold and blinding at the edges of the map. And there was another E I only let myself think about when it rained hard enough to make the fields shine like mirrors. Eli Harper. Lord, that name still tastes like green apples. He was the boy who stood in my mother's kitchen the summer before I married Thomas and sang harmony to my humming while shelling black-eyed peas. He was the neighbor boy with a car that only ran when he begged it. He was the one who read to me by flashlight in the back of a truck bed and held my hand like he'd die if he let go. He left for the service and wrote me letters that smelled like laundry soap and tents and said things like, "Ruth, if I live, I'm coming straight to your porch." But he didn't come straight to my porch. He came 2 years too late when I had a ring on my finger and Margaret had me by the waist like a ribbon on a package. He came that winter with his hat in his hands and eyes that had seen enough and said my name like an apology. I sent him away. And then, well, I've told you so much I might as well finish the line. One night I didn't send him away. I told myself it was just to talk. I told myself it was just to remember the sound of my own laugh. The house noticed. Houses notice more than you think. And Margaret noticed, because that woman noticed everything that didn't fit the story she told herself about how the world should behave. She told Thomas, and Thomas came home with a jaw like a lock. He didn't shout. That man was never cruel in ways that would leave a mark anyone else could see. He was cruel like cold, the kind of hurt that gets in your bones. We didn't speak for days. When we did, it was because I was throwing up in the morning and he had the ledger open and he said, "Continuity." without looking at me, and I said, "I know," without thinking what it would cost me. "Forgive me. I've danced around it long enough. This is the edge, and we're over it now. The storm, the hush, the basket, the note, it all sits under an ugly kind of math that I couldn't do then and can hardly do now without shaking. If my son lived and was not there, where was he? And who exactly was the boy warm against my shoulder? If you've guessed already, I won't hold it against you. People smarter than me have pieced together uglier puzzles with fewer pieces. But it took me time. It took me time because I loved the child in my arms, and that love is a fog and a compass both, thick and true. The day the truth stood up and walked right into my kitchen, the wind was from the east, and the sun was one of those weak winter coins you only get on the days when you think you might not make it. I had a pot of soup on, and a stack of bills I wasn't telling Thomas about, and I was humming a song that my mother used to sing when she scrubbed the sink, the one that makes your hands work faster. The back door eased open. You know the sound wood makes when it's about to give up a secret. That little whine. The hydrangea leaves brushed the threshold like they were trying to stop whoever it was. And in stepped Mrs. Bellamy, her grey hair a storm cloud of its own, her mouth tight. Behind her was a man I didn't know, tall, worn, handsome, eyes the colour of the shadow at the bottom of a water barrel. He took off his hat and smoothed the brim and looked at me like he was about to toss up the contents of his life onto my clean counter and ask me to sort it. "Mrs. Whittaker," he said, and there was a tug in his voice I felt in my knees. "My name is Noah Price. I think you've got something of mine." He lifted his hand, and the light from the window caught on a bit of silver that hung around his neck on a cord. A locket, pink stone, teardrop, twin to the one on Caleb's sleeping fist upstairs. I swear the room tilted, and my hand found the edge of the table, like it knew where safety was better than my head did. Something inside me recognized him before my eyes could gather him into a shape. It wasn't the way his hair curled damp at his temple, or the scar along his jaw, like a line drawn when the hand holding the pen is shaking. It was the way the air moved to make room for him, like the house had been waiting. Mrs. Bellamy closed the door behind them and set her bag down as if it were heavy with stones and choices. "Ruth," she said, my name a bandage torn off. "We need to talk." She looked old in that moment, older than bones, older than truth. "We should have talked a long time ago," she added, and the way she said it made the soup on the stove smell like dirt and iron. I opened my mouth, and the first word that came out wasn't the one I meant. It wasn't Thomas, or Caleb, or even why. It was a name I hadn't said in this house out loud since I married. A name that tasted like rain and summer and mercy. "Eli," I whispered. The man closed his eyes, just once, like something in him had been recognized and released. And when he opened them again, they were wet. He touched the locket without taking his gaze off me, and it clinked with the exact same sound mine made when it hit the headboard as I slipped it off at night. My heart had a beat I didn't like to feel. Mrs. Bellamy reached into her bag and drew out a folded paper, soft with handling, edges unspooling like lace that's been worried by busy hands. "Your boy," she said, pressing it to my palm, "lives, but he's not where you think. And the boy upstairs," she nodded upward, where a small thump and a sigh told me Caleb had rolled to his other side and gone on trusting the world. "The boy upstairs is not who you think either." I unfolded the paper with fingers that would not behave. It was another record, a twin to the one I'd pried off the cradle in the north wing, but cleaner, firmer, written in one hand in big, careful letters, like a person who wanted to make sure there would be no more mistakes. I read the top line. My eyes skipped, came back. Much later, I realized I had said the words out loud, very softly. So soft that even if no one had been there, I would have heard them in this house's big, listening ear. The line said, "Birth of a son to Ruth Harper Whitaker, concealed by request, placed with the Price family under the midwife's care. Placed with the Price family under the midwife's care." The sentence swam. My blood went to my ears and made the room sound like the ocean in a shell. I thought I might be sick right there on the checkerboard tile. "Where is he?" I asked, but it came out like a child, small and thin. "Where is my son?" Mrs. Bellamy reached for me, then rested her hands in her lap like she didn't deserve to touch me. "Safe," she said, as if that one word could hold back a flood. "On the far side of the tracks, with Noah and Mira Price. They are kinder than the story that brought him to them." The man's jaw worked like he was chewing a hard truth and trying not to spit. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady, like a fence post in wind, "I didn't come to take a baby out of your arms. You hear me? I didn't. My wife. We were told the boy needed a place until his people came to their senses. Then I learned there weren't going to be any senses to come to. Just hush money and a line drawn under the ledger." He touched the locket at his throat. "Mrs. Bellamy told me your name." I stared at that bit of silver like it might answer a question for me. It caught the kitchen light and winked in exactly the way mine did when I slipped it off at night and it tapped the headboard. For a second, I thought my eyes were tricking me. "That locket," I said, hearing my voice from far off. "Where'd you get it?" Noah glanced at the midwife and then opened the locket with a thumb that shook. Inside, the glass held a curl of hair the color of wheat and the tiniest pressed violet, dark and delicate. On the inside of the lid, someone had scratched one letter with a pin. Hesitant and stubborn both. E was wrapped in his blanket. Noah said, "Didn't feel right keeping it in the drawer. Felt like it needed a place on a body. So I wear it when I'm away from home to keep him near." He wasn't gruff, not really. He was trying to sound gruff, so he wouldn't sound like a him. I felt it like a hand from the past, pressing on my shoulder. "Evelyn, Lord have mercy." My sister had been in my kitchen with her scent in the note and her blood on my door jamb and her locket tucked around my baby's little body, like a secret nobody knew how to keep. The truth was a braid I'd ignored until it yanked my head back. "Evelyn's," I said, and the midwife's face told me I'd got it right. "She left him with you." My voice cracked on the last word. "You," as if I'd meant the house, or the world, or anyone but me. Mrs. Bellamy looked at her hands. When she finally raised her eyes, there was no keeping me safe in them. Only the white-hot kind of honesty you use when all the other tools break. "2 babies came to me that night," she said. "One in the big bed upstairs. One brought to my back door. Too early, too small, with a girl who had your laugh and your eyes and a bruise like a thumbprint on her collarbone, shaking like a leaf. I tried to send for you. Margaret had every door barred with men and favors. She told me, 'Do what needs doing to keep my house upright.' That woman's name entered the air like a draft of cold. 'Evie,' I whispered. The name made a shape in my mouth that fit nothing else. I could see her as a girl, toes black with creek silt, laughing, hair ribbon askew, stealing peaches, and swearing she'd be a woman who belonged to nobody. Then I saw her in my kitchen, older and smaller at once, folding a note and tucking it under a tin soldier. Because even in panic, she thought about poetry. Where is she? Gone, Mrs. Bellamy said softly. I kept her for 2 nights in my back room. She bled bad, but she was made of harder stuff than the men around here think. And she got up and said she had to go west to fix a thing she'd broken. She told me to tell you, if I ever could, that she loved you, and she was sorry, and not to look for her till she'd built something worth bringing you to. The midwife's eyes held mine, like she could carry the weight with me for one breath. When she left that baby. Not because she didn't love him, because she loved him too much to hand him to the wrong story. Noah leaned in, hat in hand. She asked us to keep the boy born in this house, away from this house. Her words. He looked at me a long heartbeat. Said the house don't know how to hold a secret without chewing it to death. The floor tilted again, because that meant the baby sleeping in the nursery, the one whose breath burned a path through the night straight to my heart, was not mine by blood at all. He was my sister's, and the son I had carried, the one whose hush had carved a canyon in me, the one the house had told me was somewhere. I blinked and thought I might see him if I turned quick enough. He was 3 streets over in a cottage that smelled like bread and oil and work, with people who'd tie their future to his, in a plain and honest knot, while I pretended another child had my eyes. I felt the hottest anger rise in me. It wasn't at the Price family. It wasn't even at Mrs. Bellamy, who had bent her whole life to keep the town's children from being eaten by circumstances. It was at the woman whose surname I'd taken like a blessing and found was a cage. Margaret, I said, straightening in my chair. It tasted like a coin. She gave me money and the look a person gives a butcher when she's buying a cut and doesn't want to think about the animal. Mrs. Bellamy went on, voice flat as a ledger. She told me the name of a poor family that would take a baby for a price and not ask how it came. She nodded at Noah. I chose the wrong poor family. He asked me all the questions rich people didn't. He asked me whose child it was, and whether the mother was being treated like a person, and if there was someone who would come to claim him when it got less dangerous, and whether the baby had a name, and what song should they sing to him besides the one that's just breathing, and if God was watching. Mrs. Bellamy blinked. He found me again when he learned the Whitakers were paying him in silence. I gave them their money back, Noah said simply, so I'd know the kind of man he was. And I told my wife we were going to take on a fight we didn't pick. My knees had stopped feeling. My hands had gone cold and calm, the way they get when you're about to take a piece of glass out of a child's foot. Does my boy, does he sleep through? The question was ridiculous, and also the truest thing I could ask. His sleep would tell me if his world had been gentle since I'd left it, like a sermon when it's too long, Noah said, and one corner of his mouth tipped up, and he smiles with his whole face, the way babies who don't know yet that people lie do. He glanced down at his locket again. I think his hair's gonna be like yours. Not fair, but not dark. Right there in the middle, like it can't decide. I swallowed and it hurt. I wanted to run upstairs and scoop Caleb into my arms, and also run barefoot down the lane to the Price's cottage and throw myself on their porch and beg. The 2 desires pulled me like 2 tide moons, and I knew either way I'd be torn. That's the thing no one tells you. A mother's heart is an elastic thing until it isn't, and then it can cut you in 2. What do we do? I asked. How do we hold this? We hold it for you, Mrs. Bellamy said. We hold it until you are strong enough to pick it up. You're not alone, Ruth. Not in the way Margaret needed you to be alone to make the world turn her way. She glanced at the ceiling then, that old nurse's habit of watching the weather inside a house. But we have to move curious. She smells out secrets like a hound. On cue, the front door whispered on its hinges. I knew Margaret's walk, measured, decisive, a metronome for the household. I stood so fast, my chair bit the floor and sent a yelp up my bones. In the pantry, I ordered in a voice I'd never used, and the two of them moved without argument. Noah slipped into the dark, flattening himself between shelves of preserves and sacks of flour, like a man who'd hid himself for better reasons. Mrs. Bellamy followed, but kept her hand on the edge of the door where she could push it fast if it came to that. I folded the paper and slid it under the oilcloth, right over the soft knot where the table had once had a crack, and Thomas had smoothed it with his pocket knife when we were new. "Ruth," Margaret called, already annoyed, as if I were a child who had failed to present herself properly for inspection. She entered the kitchen with the smell of lilacs that always clung to her, winter and summer. "I require the household account book. Your handwriting is beginning to look unpracticed." She pinched her lips like my script was a personal insult. "Good afternoon, Margaret," I said, and my voice was sweet as tea and twice as dangerous. "You'll find it in the drawer by the stove. I've noted every egg and every spoon of sugar for continuity." I let the word rest between us like a loaded plate. Her eyes narrowed a fraction. She might have refused to smile even if the Lord himself had told a joke. She never missed much. She took in the cooling soup, the 2 extra cups on the drain board, the damp ring on the table where a hat had been, the one fold in the oilcloth, not quite flat. "We have company." Her eyebrows made a staircase of disbelief. "The midwife came to check on the baby," I said simply, and she could argue with me, or argue with the idea of women tending to women. Either choice would cost her face. She was not careless with her face. "She's already gone," I added, which was both a lie and not. Mrs. Bellamy had moved into the pantry's shadow. The shape she cast, when light got at it, looked like a coat on a hook. Margaret let her gaze drift to the ceiling too, where a scuffle had just sounded from the nursery. I felt my thread of composure fray. "He sleeps better if I sing," I said, meaning it and not. "I should hope so," she returned. "If one is to be of use in this family, one must learn to do more than dream." She pulled the ledger free with a crisp gesture and tucked it under her arm like a Bible. "There will be a dinner next month. Your sister, what was her name?" "Evangeline." "Evelyn," I said, with the gentleness of a burn. She said, dismissing both the correction and the person. "Do send her an invitation, if she can remember how to find our door." "She knows our door," I said, smiling like a knife. We stood like that, women armed with different weapons, until the clock harumphed downstairs, and she remembered another appointment. "Fix your hair," she said, cool as a cloth on a fever. We set a table for senators, not seamstresses. Then she was gone, her perfume trailing authority. Noah exhaled the breath he'd been saving in the pantry. Mrs. Bellamy slid out with a creak that the house magnified and then kindly swallowed. My knees went out from under me into the chair. The kitchen seemed to settle, as if it had been lifted and put down slightly to the left. "Darlin'," I said to no one and everyone, and put my head in my hands. "Ruth," Mrs. Bellamy said, low and urgent, "we have to be clever now. I know that ain't fair. You've already been brave. But we have to thread this needle." Noah shifted his hat between his hands. "We can bring your boy to you at night. Safe places. You can hold him. We can do that until we can do more. Mira," she said. He swallowed, embarrassed at being so tender in another woman's kitchen. "She said no boy ought to grow up not scented with his mother's skin." His rough voice broke there, and I felt my heart reach for his wife, like a hand over a fence for another hand. "I can't take Caleb from the cradle," I said, and saying his name steadied me. "I won't, if I told myself I could. The lie would rot something in me I can't spare. He will not be another thing this house devours." Saying that, I knew I had made my vow. "We ain't asking you to," Noah said. "We're asking you to let him be loved in the broadest way. Sometimes the Lord enlarges a family by mistake and dares us to be big enough for it. He tipped his head toward the ceiling. There's more love in rooms like this than in all the ballrooms in town. I nodded, because it was either nod or break clean through. Tonight, I whispered, when the train goes through at 1, they never sleep through that noise. Everyone wakes and curses and rolls over. Meet me at the orchard gate, the 3rd tree with the lightning scar. Mrs. Bellamy touched my shoulder. You'll bring a shawl, she admonished out of habit, and shoes you can run in. Lord have mercy, I said, which meant yes. Before they left, Noah paused with his hand on the door and looked back. Ma'am, he said, there's one more thing. The boy you call Caleb, that tin soldier you found, my little brother used to make those in the foundry when he was a kid. Sold 'em at the fair. One summer, he couldn't stop telling this story of a man who left him a whole bag of them and said, for a son who deserves an army, said he'd be back to buy more. Noah's eyes flicked to mine, meaning heavy as rain. Said the man gave his name as Whitaker. The room went still, then rang. I could hear the blood go through me, hear the pipe in the wall knock, hear the small bones in my ears lean to catch anything else the world might say. The tin soldier, once a sweet oddity, became something else entirely. A breadcrumb dropped by a wolf with a gentleman's haircut. Thomas. Thomas had bought a bag of little soldiers from a boy in a cap and walked with them, hidden in his coat, like a pocket full of promises. Not for me, not for the child I'd ached to give him. For a child he had already bought in his mind. For a son he had made somewhere he had no right to be. I should have fainted. I should have screamed. I should have run at the walls. Instead, I put both hands flat on the table, felt the wood's old heart, and said nothing. Some silences are a choice. Some are a weapon. If your heart's pounding like mine, sweetheart, take a breath. We're going to keep walking, and before I take you with me out into that cold orchard night, if this story has held your hand even a little, do subscribe and stay. It helps me believe someone's out there on the other end of this old voice. Midnight came soft as a cat, as it does in places where the wind tires itself on trees. Before it reaches the house, I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, set my shoes by the back door, and for a minute just listened to the breathing of the place. I'd promised myself I wouldn't let eat me. Caleb rustled once in the nursery, an answer to some small noise. His body knows how to hear in sleep. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the frame, and whispered, I will come back. Then, because I couldn't help myself, I went to him, slid my finger under his fist till he grabbed me, and stayed that way until the clock in the hall sighed the quarter hour. When I tried to slip free, his fingers tightened, and I had to undo him finger by finger, like kissing goodbye at a train platform. The orchard gate was blacker than the night around it. The lightning-scarred tree kept watch, pale gash gleaming. In the distance, the rails hummed the way they do before the engine shows itself, as if the metal is trying to prepare the earth. Mrs. Bellamy's lantern glowed once and went out, our sign. Noah stepped out of the dark, shoulders a moving wall. Mira came behind him, smaller than I'd expected, hair braided like a crown. She had a baby bundled to her chest, in a blanket that looked like my mother's work. A particular kind of tight stitch I hadn't seen since she died. The sight stopped me like a hand to the chest. He's right here, Mira said, and her voice was like someone handing you a glass of water. At the exact minute you know you're thirsty. She opened her coat. Inside, the baby opened his mouth. In a yawn so big, it looked like a flower blooming. My body recognized him before my head did. Milk moved in me like grief. I didn't cry. I thought that was the brave thing. And maybe it was one kind of brave, but it wasn't the only one. I put my 2 hands under his small weight and took him. And for a second, we didn't fit. Like a new key in a door that's been painted shut. Then he sighed, the sweet, heavy sigh of a person who's found the place his bones like. And my arms remembered being the home they'd been promised. He smelled like soap and sun on old wood. He made a little noise that sounded like a bird landing. Mira touched my elbow, just twice. Tell him what he's called, she said. Caleb, I said automatically, then stopped, startled by my own habit. That name had come from a basket, from a panic, from a vow whispered into morning. The child in my arms looked at me, and I saw Eli in him so quickly. It almost knocked me. Oh, Eli, the boy with the green apple name. His eyes were in my son's face, and Thomas's are nowhere. Mercy, Noah, I said, looking at the man in the dark. What have you called him? Jonah, he said, and shrugged like he knew it was a little on the nose. Spat up out of the storm. We got us a sense of humor at the Price House. Jonah, I repeated, and the name fit in my mouth like bread. Hello, Jonah. I'm your mama. The world shifted then, and the ground came up and rocked me a little, like a cradle. I pressed my mouth to his forehead, and my heart did a thing I couldn't describe. If you gave me 100 more years. He blinked once at the moon, and went back to sleep, like he trusted us all. We stood like that until our eyes had learned how dark. Then I gave him back, because I'm a person with a complicated kind of honor. And because the way Mira's arms reached for him told me she had dipped all her days in bravery to keep him this far, she tucked him in tight and hummed that humming song. That is not a song. You come to us when you can, she said. So simple it broke me. We'll be where we've always been. Noah cleared his throat and looked like he wanted to tie a knot in the night so it wouldn't come undone. There's something else, he said, voice low. We didn't give the Whitakers back their money. We told them we'd accept help, if it came as food, not coin. So there'd be no paper. That way, there's no paper to burn. He glanced at me sideways. Means they come around sometimes with baskets and smugness. Last time a man came, I don't know. Tall. Looked at the baby like he was memorizing him. Didn't touch. Left real quick when he heard my boy in the other room kick his toy against the radiator. His mouth thinned. That man was afraid. Of noise. I didn't have to ask. Thomas was a quiet lover of quiet. He liked his locks clicking. He liked things that made his life tidier, but not louder. I felt my stomach go sour. He knows, I said. The words didn't surprise me. They were the only ones that could have stood up in that space. Maybe he knows enough to be dangerous, Mrs. Bellamy said. Maybe he knows enough only to keep the story going his way. Either way, you keep your feet under you. When I crept back into the house, the north wing breathed like it had been waiting. I should have gone straight to bed, but if I've learned anything about myself, it's that I don't ever walk away from a door that's thinking about telling me something. The moon fell through the glass, just enough to paint the hallway in grey. At the locked door I had opened earlier, I set the key in at a tilt and said, quietly, stupidly, because the house had me in its suspension again, Evie, silence is a kind of answer. But this time it wasn't the only one. Something skittered inside the wall. Not mice, not pipes. The sound a button makes when it pops and hits baseboard. Then, breath. Mine. The house's. Another's. I held. Myself. So still my ears hurt. In the cradle's shadow, a ribbon of pale blue moved like it had been tied to wind. I took another step, and the floorboard groaned, and from beyond the wall came a whisper so light I might have dreamed it. Ruth, my name, drugged and small. I pressed my palm flat to the plaster, like I could lay my hand on someone's cheek through a prayer. Evie, I breathed. And then, because I had learned from a lifetime with her that she couldn't take a straight kindness without biting it first, I said, "You selfish girl. You always were." A laugh, broken and beautiful. "Look at you," she said, the whisper riding itself out, big and brave and bossy as you ever were. Tears came then, as rude and healing as summer rain. "Come out from there," I begged. "Please, please, Evie." "Can't," she said. I heard her pull in a breath, like a person who'd been running for a long time. They got eyes like owls in this place. I've been keeping close, listening, making sure he's safe. I'll go when I can. Don't tell Mama. Our mother had been 10 years in the ground then. She was making a joke, the way we always did when we were about to tell the truth. "He looks like him," she added. And now her voice fell down a step and sat in the dark and didn't move. Our worst mistake. Our best too. "Ain't that the way of it?" She didn't say Thomas. She didn't have to. I went cold the way women do when they realize the weather in their life is not a thing they've been misreading. It's a thing someone else has been saying, is a tender breeze while closing all the windows. For a little while, Evie and I breathed, together, the house leaning in, the moon making us all pale. "If you're still here in the morning," I said, voice barely a thread, "I'll feed you. I'll find you a safe door. But she was already gone, the way she does. Had always done. The ribbon brushed my wrist like a kiss as the air slipped. I went to the nursery and sank down on the floor beside Caleb's crib, my back against the wood. He smelled like sleep and milk and the particular warm thing that is babies. He had my locket curled stubbornly in his fist, the way men Whitaker and otherwise hold on to things they think are theirs. I smoothed his hair and the house, sighed. You might think that's too much. Houses don't sigh, but this one does, and I'm old enough now to tell you that everything is allowed, one sigh per story. I didn't sleep. When the darkness thinned, I went to the kitchen and made coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Margaret would come. Thomas would pretend not to see. The day would demand civilized lies. But I had 2 names in my mouth now, and 2 boys in my bones. Honey, tell me something. Has a truth ever split you right down the middle and still somehow made you more whole? If you feel me, leave me a sign in the comments. Don't be shy. This old heart likes to be reminded we're none of us alone. Thought I had my arms around it. I thought I had walked right up to the edge of what the story was willing to give me and taken it. But the house still had one more corner to turn me around. It came mid-morning, when the milkman's horse had done his route, and the sun had finally found enough courage to climb. The post slid beneath the door with a civilized whisper. This house did even small things with style. I bent to gather the letters, and there, among bills and invitations and announcements about the proper length of a church hem, was an envelope with my name in a hand I had not seen written clean in years. The R was shy. The H had that second hump she did when she was happy, and the T's were crossed rude, like a boy. The stamp was crooked. It had been posted 2 towns over, and then forwarded and forwarded again, as if the person holding it had changed their mind more than once. I took it into the morning room, where the light is kinder, and I broke the seal with a fingernail as careful as a lockpick. Ruth, you're going to be so mad at me, you won't know whether to pray or swear. Do both. I did. I kept my part as best I could, and then I broke it, and now I'm asking you to break yours too. I want you to come where I am. I want you to see what I did and tell me if it was something a good woman can do and still be a good woman. Lord, sis. There's no way to say it pretty. He'll come looking. He'll come looking, and he'll say the right things, and then he'll do the wrong ones. He always does. I loved him like falling off a roof. Fast and stupid. You loved him like a porch. Sitting and sure. We both got hurt different ways, but he ain't done. He ain't done because men like him always think there's one more thing the world owes them. And if the world won't pay, they'll take it out of the woman who loved them last. I left the boy because he deserved a mother who wasn't a fire. You are water and bread and shade, and he will live under your hand. But the other boy, the one you made, the one I rocked through a hole in a wall while you slept because there was no other way to make the story line up, he is yours. And I can hear him across the field like a bell. Don't let anyone tell you. The sound is something else. Come to the bridge where the river forgets itself and turns. There's a post there with a nail stuck through it sideways. Tie a strip of your shawl so I'll know it's you. I will be in the spruce stand where we dared each other to kiss boys when we were 12. I won't come out if anyone's with you. I love you. I'm sorry. I can't stop moving. The man who thinks everything belongs to him is hunting the one thing he cannot own, the part of you that still believes in mercy. I read it 3 times, and none of them made it hurt less. The house's walls felt like they were listening for something again. I folded the letter small and tucked it inside my dress, like a relic. If you're wondering whether I told Thomas, no. There are truths you tell into cups of coffee across a breakfast table, and there are truths you whisper to trees. This was for trees. I took a strip from the edge of my shawl. I tied my hair back. I put bread and an apple in a satchel and told Esme, the girl who'd come to help with the washing, that I had a headache and would be in the garden. Then I set out across our fields, like a woman who makes her own luck. The bridge where the river forgets itself and turns is really just a glorified plank with a rail. But it feels like a place in a story every time you set foot on it. The water below slides fast, then stumbles, then decides it meant to do that. I tied my strip to the old nail and waited. I said an ugly prayer. I said a pretty one. A stray dog came by and judged me and moved on. The wind combed the grass. Don't you dare make me beg, I said to the trees. I never did like to keep you waiting. Evelyn answered, stepping out so soft a rabbit could have slept through it. She was thinner. Her eyes were the same. She had our mother's mouth on her face, like a gift she had earned. She smelled like wool and rain. When I put my hands on her shoulders, she closed her eyes like someone had finally poured water down her throat. After a long thirst, you put your baby on my porch, I said. I put my baby in your hands, she corrected. You put yours in a house that would have eaten him in his first nap. If I hadn't learned to move like smoke. Her chin went up, as defiant as ever. I know your house better than anyone should have to know a house. There's a door behind the door. There's a wall that ain't a wall. There's a woman who thinks God took a second job for her in her ledger. You slept in my walls, I said, and I didn't have it in me to make it a question. I watched over what I broke, she said, not sorry and sorry both. When I heard her say continuity like a spell, I knew I had to make sure the line she was protecting didn't strangle you. I couldn't take him. If I took him, they'd burn the county to ash to get him back. Because he's got that man's bones. And boys like that are always a story people think they can fix. But I could put mine in your arms. And I could tell you where your own is. And I could meet you at a bridge and beg you to stop being so good, just for a minute, just long enough to come with me and get out of that house. I can't leave him, I said. And we both knew which him I meant first. I know, she said. And you can't leave the other him either. She smiled then, crooked and bright, dangerous as a match. So don't leave either. Be the woman who breaks the rule that says you only get to love one child at a time, one man at a time, one life at a time. Be greedy with goodness, sis. Take it all. Make the world big enough for it. A twig snapped behind us. We both went stone. There's a kind of stillness country girls learn. That way animals go quiet right before the hawk's shadow passes. I turned slow. On the far side of the field, a figure stood just behind the fence line, hat low, hands in pockets. You know how some men can make a whole meadow feel like a small room. That way, he didn't move. He didn't have to. He was looking at us, and the gaze was not a question. Beneath the brim, the line of his jaw was familiar enough to make my stomach turn. Thomas didn't move like that. Thomas stood like the law. This man stood like the end of a song. Eli, I breathed, and the ground dropped away under me. Evelyn's hand closed on my sleeve, hard enough to bruise. Don't, she said, under her breath. Don't you let him walk you back into the same mistake. Not a mistake, Eli called, and the wind carried it to us, neat as a placed card. He lifted his head, and the years fell off him like rain. He was older, yes, and his eyes had seen more than they deserved. But he was Eli all the way through, the boy with the apple grin, the man who could hold a promise in his mouth and make it sweet. We are the kind of people who make our own. Word true, he said. I took one step without meaning to. Then I stopped. Did you know? I asked him. Did you know my boy was alive and didn't tell me? Did you write to me and stop yourself and post it anyway from 2 towns over and think that's goodness? Eli flushed. His mouth opened. He shut it. He took off his hat and twisted it. I knew late, he said finally, honest enough to be ugly. I knew when I ran into a midwife with blood on her apron and a Bible under her arm, and the meanest man in town, not far behind her. I knew when I saw your sister ghosting your hallway like a prayer. Somebody didn't finish. I knew when I saw a baby that had your mouth and my bad temper, and a man in a tie look at him like he was counting money. I knew, and I thought if I came to you without a plan, I'd only bring the fire closer. So I made a plan. It's a bad one. It's all I got. You and your plans. Evelyn muttered, fond despite herself. That man is the reason I have. To make them. Eli shot back, and now the edge was up in him. He'll take both boys, and call it virtue if we let him. He'll tell the town he did the right thing, so loud they won't hear us saying he didn't. Thomas, I said, saying the name like I might exercise it. Eli nodded once. He came to me, he said, mouth tilted at an angle of disgust. Asked me if I thought the world had a way of correcting itself. Said if a man had 2 sons, one too many, and one not enough, maybe God had left the door open for him to fix it. Eli looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the sick fear I never had a name for. He knows the basket wasn't an accident. He knows you didn't trip and fall into a perfect story. He thinks he's the author. He always has. You will not touch him, I said, and I didn't clarify which him. The air was so sharp you could shave with it. I came to ask you to trust me, Eli said. One last time. I came to tell you the house you live in has a second house inside it, and I know the way through. I came to tell you that the ledger Margaret keeps is a map, and if you turn it sideways, you'll see the rooms no one is supposed to know about. I came to tell you that the baby crying inside their walls is not a ghost. It's the sound of the past trying to keep you from being buried under it. And I came to tell you to pack one bag and meet me at midnight and 3 nights by the train. Evelyn said over him, bring your boy, and I'll bring mine, and we'll see if the truth can outrun the richest lie in town. The track sang in the distance again, the train from the city carrying newspapers that would tell us what the world thought it knew. My shawl pulled at my shoulders, where I'd ripped it. My hands were empty and full. I stood there between my sister and the boy I'd loved, and the man I'd married, who wasn't there, and somehow was everywhere. And I knew something I hadn't known at the start of this story. Sometimes the right thing is too big for a single woman to do. Sometimes it takes 3 sinners and a midwife and a house with its own heartbeat. Sometimes it takes you. If you're still here, my dear, thank you for walking into the dark with me. Take a sip of water, wipe your eyes if you need, and tell me, have you ever stood at a bridge and had to choose which parts of yourself to carry across? I'd open the comments just to read your answers and hold your hand a bit. I went home, and the house knew. How do I explain that? The floorboards softened under my feet like they didn't want me to trip. The clock found a more merciful rhythm. Even the portrait of the coin-mouthed Whitaker seemed less inclined to bite. I went to the north wing, set my palm on the nursery wall, and a breath met mine from the other side. Soon, I whispered to all our restless selves. I thought I'd have 3 days to plan. We got one. Because men who think they're authors don't like it when the characters start writing. They hurry their endings. I found Thomas in the library that night, the lamplight making his hair look soft. He was reading the paper like it owed him money. When I walked in, he folded it with that precise care that always felt to me like control, disguised as gentility. "Ruth," he said, pleasant as a knife. "Thomas," I said, and sat across from him like the chair, and I had an understanding. "Have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart?" I asked, out of nowhere, and I watched his face do the thing faces do when they're caught at a door they didn't know was open. "Forgive?" he repeated, and turned the word in his mouth until he could spit it out. "We do not deal in forgiveness in this family," he said mildly. "We deal in fortitude." "Fortitude," I repeated. "Is that what you call a woman sleeping in your walls?" He didn't flinch. I will give him that. He was as brave as the worst men are, which is to say, he didn't blink at cruelty. "We call that charity," he returned. "We give the less fortunate shelter. We give them money. We give them a chance to keep their mouths shut." His eyes did a little flick to the ledger at his elbow. He thought he had everything written down. That made it true. "I visited the Price House today," he added, conversational, "to deliver our due." He smiled the small smile of a man, pleased by his own discipline. "The child's complexion is unfortunate, but no one will question my generosity. There are moments when you want to throw the lamp and set the curtains on fire, just to watch the world reflect how it feels inside you." I did not throw the lamp. I leaned forward, rested my elbows on my knees, the way a man would, and let him see my teeth. "If you touch either of those boys," I said, "I will open this house like a chest and show the town the rotten hearts of everything in it. I will pull back wallpaper with my bare hands and let the secrets fly into the street like bats. You can count on my fortitude." Tom's eyes darkened. He sat back. "Continuity," he said. He always said the same word when he'd been caught, like a child with a prayer, who thinks the sound of it matters more than the meaning. "Do not threaten me, Ruth. I'm promising you," I answered. "That's different." And then, because I am not a saint, I reached for his paper and drew it toward me with a finger. "And fortitude," I added, "soft as butter and sharp as brandy, is what a woman calls it when she swallows a husband's sins to keep the floor from collapsing under the baby's cradle. I've done my share." I stood. "Say goodnight to your ghosts." I left him there with his ledger and his paper and the lamp making a saint's halo on a man who had no idea how to behave inside it. I went upstairs to the nursery and lay on the floor with my ear to the boards, listening to a sound that had not belonged to me, but now did. The weight of my own courage, moving at last. We didn't get 3 nights. Before midnight, there was a knock on the back door. Quiet, urgent, and polite. The kind of knock that means the person on the other side is trying not to scare you and failing. I went to it with my shawl tight. When I opened the door, a boy stood there with a cap in his hands and fear on his face, like a rash. He was 14 maybe, and sharp around the edges, like boys who've had to learn how to be their own fathers. He held out his palm. In it sat the tin soldier, warm from his skin. "Ma'am," he said, breathless, words tumbling. "There's a fire at the Prices. Not at the house, at the shed. The men say it's nothing. They say it's hay. Mrs. Price sent me to you. She said to bring you this so you'd run faster." I took the soldier and the medal, burned my hand. For the second time in as many days, the world tilted, and I had to find a new way to stand. If you stayed with me through this mess of confession and courage, hold on tight. We're not done. And if this story has touched your heart even a little, my dear, do subscribe and come back to me. I ain't in a hurry, but the truth is, and I'd like to tell it to you while we can still hear each other. I ran, the road pitched under me like a moving beast. Night air sliced my lungs, and the orchard trees reached out their crooked fingers like they wanted to stop me and pray first. The sky had that ugly orange lip you get when a shed burns, and men tell themselves it's controlled. I could hear the fire before I saw it, popping, keening, the dry laugh of boards giving up, and over it all, a baby's cry, not from the flames, but from the house, righteous and alive, a sound so pure it knocked my knees. Mira stood on the porch, with Jonah on her hip, his face red with fury at the glow. Her hair had come loose, and the braids swung like a bell rope. Noah was in the yard, beating at the shed with a wet canvas, like he was putting out a story before it could catch. Two men I didn't know stamped around with buckets, making themselves useful and in the way. Then I saw him. Not Noah. Not the neighbors. A man just past the picket fence. His hat low. His shoulders mean with intent. He moved like he'd learned to walk in rooms where people hushed when he entered. The afraid of noise man. He kept to the darkest seam. But I know that posture. Men who like power wear their backs the same. I didn't think, darling. I'm not sure I could have. When the Lord puts a bolt through you and points you in a direction, you go. I snatched a baking sheet off the porch rail and threw it down the steps. It hit every board like a choir of pots. The sound went up into the night and back down like rain. Jonah startled, then hiccuped into that breathless half cry that means he's too surprised to know what to do. The stranger flinched, hands flying to his ears. God bless him. And in that flinch I saw the plan. Set a small fire, draw everyone out, go in soft as shadow and lift the baby. Kerosene turned to destiny by a man with a pocketbook. Inside, I told Mira, shoving the door with my hip while she moved on instinct. Bolt it. She did without looking. The muscle memory of women. I slid down the railing, landed wrong, swore under my breath, and found myself face to face with the stranger across the fence. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, and my stomach went hard ice. He knew me by sight in the dark. "You shouldn't be here. That makes two of us," I told him, and picked up another pan and smacked it against the post so hard the vibration ran up my arm. The noise cut at him like nettles. His jaw ticked. Then, beyond us, something changed in the shed fire. Someone had got to the heart of it. The flames sank, muttered, sulked. The show was losing its shine. He took a step toward the gate. Noah came out of the smoke with that bucket like a fist. He saw the man, saw my face, saw the second pan half raised in my grip, and put his long body between us without a word. "Evening," he said, voice flat. "We don't need you." "I'm here from the Whitakers," the man said, brushing ash off his sleeve like the air offended him. "Aiding our neighbors. Mrs. Whitaker, your husband sent me to make sure no harm came to this arrangement." He reached into his pocket. Then, and I moved. Lord, I moved like I had springs in my bones. I was on him before he could let me see what he thought was going to settle me. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, like your granddaddy taught you to do if you were born where I was. He yelped, dropped whatever he held, a glint, a small thing, and jerked free with a curse. Red-faced, he stumbled back, caught his heel on the fence rail, and went down in a puff of dirt and pride. Noah didn't waste it. "You're trespassing," he said, low. "And if you set that fire, you're worse. Leave while you can still call it a good deed." The man glared at both of us, humiliated enough to be stupid, smart enough not to. He backed away into the dark, hissing a promise I didn't bother to hear, and disappeared down the lane the way cowards do, quick and quiet, and already working up a story about how this had been their idea. My hand shook. I looked down to see what he'd dropped. A cufflink, heavy as gilt, caught the porch light and winked up at me with a little engraved crest. W. My mouth went dry. It might as well have said, "Property of the devil." I slid it into my pocket, where it burned like brandy. Mira cracked the door, eyes wide, baby's cheeks wet. The second locket, ears glinting against her skin. "You all right?" she asked, her breath sitting high in her chest. "Now I am," I managed. I put my palm on Jonah's warm hair through the doorway, long enough to steady a piece of me that had been rattling since the day I was born. He calmed, under my hand, because some things don't forget, even if people do. "You lock up tight," I told her. "You send for the sheriff. Not the one with the soft eyes. The one with the wife who hates my mother-in-law." She smiled, brief and wild. Already done. The shed fire lost its appetite and slumped to coals. The night patched itself back together around the hole it had torn. Noah's shoulders dropped an inch. Mira handed him a cup with something strong that smelled like the way men steady themselves when they don't want you to see the tremble. He nodded at me over the rim. We had no more words left that wouldn't spill. On the walk home, the dark was thick and purposeful. Every step wrote a sentence. Every breath read it aloud. I had a cufflink in my pocket, an ash under my nails, and a word in my mouth I hadn't said yet. Enough. My dear, if this story is putting a little heat in your chest, stay close. Subscribing helps me keep the lamps lit in these old rooms while I tell you the rest. Thomas was waiting up, of course. Men like him don't sleep when they think the world might be getting ideas. He was in the library as ever, making notes in the ledger like he could bind the town with ink. He looked up when I came in, took in my ash-dirt ankles, the wild thread of my hair, the set of my jaw. "Your friends," he said, his voice pleasant in the way of a man who believes manner is morality, lack respect for fire. "They have it in spades," I said evenly. "They put it out faster than you'd believe." I set the cufflink on the edge of his book, like a communion wafer. "You dropped this," I said. His gaze drank it in. Something moved in his face, but the skin didn't show it. "My crest," he said mildly. I trust it was near something worthy. "A baby," I said. And the hand that tried to grab him. I leaned in until I could smell the starch in his shirt and the fear under it. If you ever send a man to take a child out of his mother's arms again, out of any mother's arms, you'll wish the whole world were made of ledgers. Because the thing I am when you push me past the edge won't be something you can column up. He set his pen down carefully and folded his hands like a pastor before a lie. "Ruth," he said, You have always been tender-hearted. He meant weak. He smiled at me, like I was a puppy who'd learned a parlor trick. Continuity requires difficult choices. We keep what is ours. We set right what is not. That is the burden of this house. I laughed, and it wasn't kind. This house, I said, is tired of being your excuse. I stood up because I was tired of talking down to him, and I wanted my bones to be tall. Tomorrow you will invite the town into these rooms. The ladies' guild, the church board, the man with the gavel, and the woman who owns him. You will invite the Prices, Mrs. Bellamy, the sheriff, Eli Harper if he has the nerve. You will smile and pour coffee and keep your temper, and I will tell the truth in the middle of your rug, like a sacrament. If you try to stop me, I will set this place singing with secrets until even the rafters blush. His mouth twitched. He never loved me more than when he thought I was like him. You will shame yourself, he said softly. No, I said, with the calm that comes when the worst thing is finally named and the world doesn't end. I will free myself. I turned to go. Go to sleep, Thomas. You'll need your strength. Upstairs, I lay on the nursery floor again, as near to Caleb as I could get without breathing his breath. He'd fallen asleep with my locket still, gripped tight, the E inside pressing against his palm like a brand. I laid my other hand on the floorboards and felt the faintest okay from the other side. Evie, I thought, be ready. Morning came clean and rude. The house dressed itself like it always did for company, in light and polish, and the smell of butter. Esme ran herself ragged ironing napkins until they were dangerous, setting cups, lining up spoons like soldiers. Margaret made rounds like a general with lilies for a lapel. You look pale, she said to me, eyes sweeping the field of my face for weeds. Don't faint, it will be vulgar. I won't faint, I said. I will testify. She blinked, slower than usual, like a reptile. People arrived. They do, don't they? With hats and gossip and the sort of hunger that wears gloves. The room filled with wool and perfume, and the sound of a town deciding who it wanted to be this week. The sheriff came with his wife in a dress that said, "Try me." Mrs. Bellamy slipped in like common sense. Noah and Mira came hand in hand, Jonah snug against her chest. In that blanket, I swear had my mother's ghost in its weave. Eli came at the back, eyes down, hat in hands, as if a man like him could ever hide his own light. When he looked up at me, I felt something old, keen and quiet in my ribs. I nodded once. We had no time for the 100 years that lived between us. Thomas took the center of the room, as if it had been built around him. He opened his mouth to welcome, and to frame, and to gentle, because he knew that if you decide the subject early, you can make people answer questions you haven't asked yet. I didn't let him get a word out. I stepped into the space he thought was his, and laid my palms on the back of a chair like it was a pulpit. My friends, I said. They went still, because women don't interrupt like that in rooms like these, and because I sounded like Will. You are welcome in the Hawthorn. You have drunk our tea and eaten our cake, and let us pretend with you that the walls of this place are only wood. I am here to tell you the walls of this place remember, and that today they will speak. I could feel the house lean, a fraction, pleased. Ruth, Thomas said, warning tucked into charm. The senator can find his own chair, I said, and watched his teeth flash, because he'd lost the room already. I didn't start with the ugly. I started with love. A baby came to me on a storm night, I said, and the ladies in their rows softened, the way people do when they smell milk. He came in a basket with a tin soldier, and a note no one's handwriting but a girl's. For Ruth. Forgive me. I took him in and I called him my son, and I have loved him every hour since. If you have judged me harshly in your kitchens, if you have blessed me in your pews, you are right in both directions. We are complicated. I lifted my chin, found Mira in the crowd, found Mrs. Bellamy's steady gaze, found the sheriff's wife already choosing a side. Another baby came that night, I said. He came the old way, with pain in hands, and the hush that can kill you if you let it. He lived. I was told he did not. He was lifted out of this house and placed into another by a midwife who did what she thought would keep me from ruin, and this house from scandal. He is here in his mother's arms. I am that mother. A sound went through the room like a bird taking off. People turned their heads quick, the way you do when truth changes the furniture. Thomas laughed, that small dry laugh men practice when their own breath scares them. Darling, he said to the room, not to me. My wife is overwrought. We suffered a loss. The next day we were blessed. That is all. Mrs. Bellamy stepped forward and set a paper on the polished table like a body. It ain't all, she said. Not near. I did wrong under pressure. I am doing right now. Late and not too late. She put her finger on the record. Hard enough the paper sighed. Birth of a son to Ruth Harper Whitaker. Concealed by request. Placed with the Price family under the midwife's care. She looked at the sheriff. You'll find my hand on it. You'll find Margaret's money on it too, if you hold it to the light. Heads turned to Margaret. She did not flinch. I'll give her that. She has the backbone God gives mothers who confuse. Protect with control. Continuity, she said simply, like a judge. Continuity, I repeated. And then I set down the other truth, the one that would burn. The son I raised in this mansion wasn't mine. He is my sister's. And the father is standing in this room smiling like a man at his own funeral. You could hear skirts think. You could hear the portrait on the wall decide whether to fall. Thomas's face did a small private thing and stormed over it fast. This is slander, he said, and there was new steel in his tone. The kind people use when they're about to crush someone and call it tidying up. Evelyn Harper is a, say it, I invited him. Finish the word you've been swallowing, while you used her body to fix your family line. Gasps. That sweet wet sound rooms make when they're watching a man decide who he is in public. Evelyn, ain't a word, a voice said from nowhere, and right next to us both. She's a person, and she's done being a rumor. The wall gave a small sigh. The ribbon of pale blue moved like water, and then my sister stepped out of the north wing, like a secret becoming a song. It took a heartbeat for anyone but me to understand how she had come to be in the middle of us, without a door. When the heartbeat passed, the room remembered how to breathe and promptly forgot how not to talk. Evie looked like every truth you've ever been afraid to say. She was thin as a blade and twice as purposeful, with eyes that matched mine and a bruised memory on her collarbone, like a thumbprint the world had left there for us to look at and choose to ignore, or not. She didn't look at Thomas. She looked at me. That saved us all. You always did pick the loudest rooms, she said, mouth tilting old and fond. You always did pick the worst men, I said. And we both smiled. And the smile kept us upright, on the floor that had just moved. Tell it, I said then, and put my hand over hers, because I wanted my warmth to be under her words. She told it. Not long, not pretty. She told how a rich man, with a hunger for his own legend, found a girl who had always thought she could outrun anyone, and made her think she could outrun consequences too. She told how he loved like a person, who can buy more of what he breaks. She told about the night the storm came, and how she carried her baby to the back door of the woman who had caught every Whitaker since the war, and how she begged, and how the midwife put her hands on her cheeks and said, I can save the child, but I can't save the story. She told about the nights after, sleeping in our walls, because Margaret had bribed the doors shut, and she wasn't about to leave her mistake or her mercy to the care of people who said continuity like a prayer. When she said, "The father is Thomas Whitaker," the room finally did the thing it had been threatening to do since we all walked in. It let the portrait go. The coin-mouth ancestor, prim and biting, shook in his frame and crashed to the floor like a curtain. Behind the picture, the velvet pouch with the key fell and spilled, the old medal skidding to my shoe like a pet that had picked a side. Somebody crossed themselves. Somebody swore. The sheriff's wife said, "Would you look at that?" and didn't mean the key. Thomas felt his power retreat down his arms, and it made him mean. "You," he said to Evelyn, and I moved because the way he said it had a whole hand raised in it. "You will leave my house, or I will have you dragged." "You'll do nothing," Eli said, and there was nothing fancy in it, just a boy from a kitchen with a spine. He stepped forward with his hat in his hands, like respect, and put himself between Thomas and the woman Thomas had hurt. "You will stand where you are and thank the Lord someone loved that baby, enough to keep him safe from you." Everyone saw it then. The line snapped into focus, the braid of it. Me and my sister, and the men who'd loved us badly and well, the midwife who had done a wrong thing for a right reason, and then came to make it right, the rich man who used continuity like a cudgel, the family who took a baby and made a son. Stories are funny that way. They keep laying down thread until suddenly you realize you're walking on a roof, and you either step with faith or you fall. I reached into Caleb's fist and untangled my locket. He muttered in his nap in Esme's arms and gripped my finger for good measure. I popped the locket open with a thumbnail. The ear glinted like a dropped stitch. I held it up where everyone could see. "You want continuity?" I asked the room. "Let me show you a line." I pointed to Jonah, humming asleep now, against Mira's breast. "There is the son I made with a boy I loved the wrong way at the right time. He lived and they stole. Him and these good people kept him gentle for me anyway." I pointed to Caleb, my heart's own. "There is the son I raised with all the days God gave me. He is my sister's, and that does not make him less mine. Both boys breathe. Both boys belong. Continuity is love, not ledger." Silence. The kind that chooses a new shape. The sheriff, a small man with the quiet rage of a decent one, cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "I'm going to need to ask you where your man was last night when the price shed went up." He glanced at the cufflink I had set on the table. "And I'm going to need to know why he was at their fence before the fire was cold. And I'm going to need you to explain this ledger note." He held up a new paper. Mrs. Bellamy, God bless her, had produced like a magician a receipt for a large cash payment, signed, with discretion, scrawled untidily in Thomas's neat's hand. To my wife when she asked me later how I forgot to mention it over pork chops, Margaret tried once more. "This," she said, calm and poisonous, "is not for the street. This is family." She looked around like she was offering charity. "We can solve this with quiet and class." "No," I said, smiling the smallest, sharpest smile I own. "We will solve this with light. The house took that as permission. I swear it did. The door to the north wing, stiff, since I'd first walked these halls, opened itself a finger width inside. The cradle inside creaked once, as if nodding. The ribbon stirred in a room with no breeze. People turned their heads, as if they had all simultaneously remembered they were in a story. It takes only a nudge for a town to realize it is a witness. Thomas saw it, saw the way power was pooling elsewhere, and did the one truly cowardly thing he did in all our years. He ran, not out the front, where the law was, but toward the north wing, The dark place where men like him always assume they can close a door and change the ending. He got the door half shut before I reached it. I slid through like a thought and stood with my palm on the wood. "Don't," I said, and my voice went down into the old bones of the house. "Not this time." He stopped because he had no place. Left to go, he turned, breathing fast. And for a second I saw the boy he had been. The one who learned early that if he spoke a word slow enough, it turned heavy. And if he wrote a story neat enough, it became law. I almost felt sorry. The way you feel sorry for a wolf when it starves. Because it's too proud to eat berries. "Ruth," he said, soft and cruel both. "Come back. We can fix what you broke." "I'm fixing what you broke," I said, and stepped back into the light. It didn't end with handcuffs and shouting. It ended with a woman in a plain dress, Mrs. Bellamy, standing at our table with a record and a steady voice, and another woman, Mira, lifting her chin so the locket on her throat flashed, and a man, Noah, putting a hand on his wife's, back like the best vow, and a boy, Eli, standing still, while the life he could have messed up got bigger than all of us, and a town doing its math in whispers, and another woman, Margaret, staring at the hole in the wall, like it had grown, itself, and me, holding two names in my mouth and finding there was room. The sheriff didn't arrest Thomas for the babies. He arrested him for the fire, for sending a man to frighten good people, and maybe steal their child, and make it look like a story that made him the hero. That was enough to loosen his grip. It was enough to teach the town where to stand. He posted bail, of course. Men like him always do. He left the house because he saw for the first time that it wasn't his. He went to his mother's rooms, down the hill, and withdrew into the only ledger that had never argued with him. Margaret stayed where she could count the spoons. What came after was not fast. The law is not a horse. It's a mule. It plods. It balks. But it pulls. Papers were filed, signed, folded, stuck, unstuck. Mrs. Bellamy testified with the weary courage of a person who decided some of her life could be spent on fire if it kept children from burning. The cuffling told its small, shiny truth. Eli swore on the Bible and didn't lie. The Prices, with more dignity than half the senators who used our silver, said we are not taking anything from anyone. We are adding. The judge, a woman with creases, in her face, like honest weather, wrote a word I didn't know I'd needed to see. Custody shared. It looked like mercy in black ink. I wish I could tell you that I took both boys and lit out for the county line, and we lived on peaches and poems. That would be the kind of lie that keeps you watching. The truth is better and harder. We built a big family out of 2 houses. I moved into the small cottage that had belonged to my grandmother, halfway between the Hawthorne and the Price's place, where the road curves like a question. I took the north room with the morning light and put 2 cribs in it and waited to see where each boy slept best when the dark got long. Sometimes they both ended up with me, warm as kittens, one with eyes like a storm barrel and one with a mouth like mine. Sometimes Caleb, because I could not stop calling him that any more than I could stop breathing, slept best at the Hawthorne with the ivy and the old wood. And sometimes Jonah slept best where the wind off the field made the curtains full. Margaret hated it and still sent baskets and notes written like edicts. Thomas did not come. I did not miss him. Evelyn stayed just long enough to make the town say her name right. She taught Esme to get in and out of the north wing without a bruise. She ate toast in my kitchen and called it a feast. She held both boys and said, "Look at us." And I did, until I had to blink because joy is bright. She left without telling me when because that is how she is built. But she left me a real address on a back page of a borrowed book and a scrap in the sugar jar that said, "If it turns, let it turn." And this time, thank God, it turned into something steady. Eli came by when it rained, and the porch could hide him, and left a fixed latch, and a basket of apples, and a second chance folded so small it took me months to find it. We did not marry. That surprises you maybe. It shouldn't. We had made our mistake and our miracle already. We left the rest to the boys. He loved them with a gentleness that made me forgive him. Things I hadn't said words over yet. He married a good woman 10 years later who liked my biscuits and didn't mind that. I loved a piece of him that had belonged to me when I was young enough to think love could make the world do what I wanted. The hawthorn didn't die. I wouldn't let it. A house like that can be a prison or a refuge, depending on who holds the key. After Margaret went, quietly, in lavender, in a bed that had seen too much performance and not enough sleep, I opened the doors. We started. Something that didn't have a name for a while, and then did. A home. Girls came to us with babies, and without, with bruises, and better stories ahead. We put clean sheets on beds, and pots on stoves, and changed the only kind of continuity a town ought to brag about: kindness. If you're wondering about Thomas, I'll tell you the truth, because that's the arrangement we made at the start. He left, not far, because men like him don't know any other towns, only smaller rooms. He tried to write me once, in a hand that had never looked uncertain before. He asked for forgiveness the way a man asks for change at a counter. I sent him a letter that said, "Forgiveness ain't a ledger. I'm learning it in bigger rooms." He died before the boys were men. Neither went to the funeral. Death doesn't make a good father out of a bad one. It just ends the conversation. You want to know about the boys? Of course you do. That's why you've still got your blanket tucked up and your tea gone cold. Caleb grew with that steadiness he had even in the cradle. Curious, cautious, kind, with himself. After he learned to be kind to others first, he learned every seam of this house like a map, and then used that knowledge to keep other people from getting lost. When he was 12, he found the place in the wall where you can hear the pipes humming like a choir, and said, "Does it make you feel safe?" And I said, "Yes, baby, it does." Because hearing the inside of things can be a comfort. When he was 15, he came home with a busted lip and a smile, because he'd stepped between a smaller boy and a bigger one, and found out he liked the way it felt to make it stop. When he was 20, he told me he wanted to help run the home for girls, and I thought, my heart would put on a dress and dance. Jonah grew like weather, changing, true to his own rules. He laughed louder, cried quicker, forgave in big strokes. He loved engines, the hum of necessary things, learned how to listen to a machine and tell you what hurt. He watched Eli put a truck to rights like a prayer and said, "I want to do that," and did. He came to my porch, dirty and beaming, and said, "I put a man back on the road today," and I kissed his cheek and said, "Lord have mercy, that'll preach." They knew from a very young age that they were both mine. They knew from slightly older than that what blood had done and undone among the adults in their lives. They never used it like a weapon. Do you hear me? They never once used it like a weapon. They used it like a tool some days, a way to pry open a stuck thing, like music most days, a way to hum themselves back into being. They called each other brother from the first time Jonah found the word, and threw it like a ball for Caleb to catch. People would get confused sometimes in the way people will, and one of them would say, "We're both Whitakers," and "We're both not," and it would shut their mouths sweet as sugar. Years moved like a meal in courses. Some good, some you choked down, some you wish you could have twice. And then, sweetheart, we arrive where we began. My bones old and sweet, my hands still sure. The fire talking in the hearth like it's got stories of its own. And a young man's palm open to take a weight he asked for, and didn't and deserves anyway. Caleb sits across from me, his face his own, his mouth a note my sister once sang without meaning to, his eyes not Thomas's, thank God, but carrying that same stubborn little light that says, I will make this room a place I know how to stand in. I put the locket in his palm. He holds it like it's breathing. I tell him all of it, again, and this time with the corners not rounded, because he's earned the sharp. He listens like he always has, still and entire. When I say the sentence out loud, the one that rang the bell that night in front of God and everybody, the one that turned me into the woman I needed to be, he closes his fingers around that. Like he's making a promise to a girl he never knew. The son I raised in this mansion wasn't mine. I say, you are my sisters, and I would choose you every day for the rest of the days God gives me, even knowing every bruise this truth has put on both of us. He looks at me for a long time, the way he did when he was 6, and trying to understand how snow can be cold and beautiful at once. Then he reaches across the table and puts his hand on my cheek, and it's a man's hand now, heavy and soft at the same time, and he says, I know, Mama. He lets the E swing once and catches it. I knew when I was 10, and I overheard Aunt Evie say it right to your face, and you cried and laughed. I knew when I was 13, and I saw the way Mr. Whittaker flinched at his own name in my mouth. I knew when I was 17, and I went to the Price place to carry lumber, and Mrs. Price hugged me like she had a right, and I ducked and didn't. I've known, and it doesn't change who I am. Who are you? I whisper, because that's the only question that matters at the end of any story. I'm your son, he says simply, and I'm hers, and I'm mine. He smiles. And out of the corner of his mouth, I swear I can see my mother and Evie, and even a little of the boy I used to give my laugh to when we were both young enough to think that would be enough to live on. And I'm his, he adds, glancing toward the window where the hawthorn stands, quiet as a witness that has finally been asked the right questions. The houses, I'll keep her kind. We sit like that. 2 people at a table, and a heap of years between us that feel like a blanket, not a wall. The fire cracks. Somewhere in the north wing, an old cradle rocks once, out of habit, and then is still. The house breathes. And for the first time since I was 18, all the windows feel open. My dear, before I set this tale down, tell me, did any part of this turn ring against the bell in your belly? Have you ever set a secret in the light and watched it stop being a monster? If this story found you tonight, do subscribe and stay. These old bones have a few more rooms to unlock with you yet. And leave me a little note. Have you ever forgiven someone who broke your heart and found your own heart grew bigger, not smaller? I'd love to hear your story too. We hold each other up that way. If you stayed with me till the end, my dear, thank you. Tell me the time and country you're watching from in the comments. It warms my old heart knowing where my stories travel.